You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
Hey everyone, I'm Rod Roddenberry, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Are you taking all these books? I thought I'd take some light reading. Guess I got bored.
Well, hello and welcome to Literary Treks, your local books and comics show here on the TFM network for Star Trek. And I'm just one of the hosts, Matthew Rushing, and so excited to be back with none other than Casey Pettitt. Casey, how are you doing, man? It feels like forever since we've been here to talk about Star Trek books.
Yeah, I feel like I was in Hawaii last time I recorded, but I was.
Yeah, just rubbing your travel privilege in my face. That's fine.
But yeah, we had a great interview, last time. So if you haven't listened to it, we talked about the autobiography of Benjamin Sisko, and that was awesome. And yeah, it feels like it's been forever since we've talked. So I think we've got a really interesting discussion ahead of us today. And yeah, just glad to be here once again.
Yeah, I am excited about this one as well. I think it's going to be really interesting, like you said. I think the book is going to be a lot of fun for us to be able to talk about as we dive into the Lost Era series, the books we haven't covered in that era. Some great stuff coming up, but we'll be covering the first one, the Sundered, today. Before we do dive in, though, of course, we want to thank everybody for listening. We really appreciate you hitting up Literary Treks. Of course, you can find us all over social media on X at Trek FM. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/Trek FM. We're on Instagram at Trek FM. You can find the listeners only discussion group as well. You can join called the Babel Conference on Facebook, as well as going to Trek.fm and seeing all of the shows we're doing. And if you like what we do here and you want to make sure that continues, the best way to support us is to go over to Patreon at patreon.com/TrekFM. Become somebody who helps out this network. We have great associate producers here on this show, Casey Pettitt, as well as Greg Rozier. We really appreciate their support, making sure that all of the content, especially Literary Treks, does come to you each and every week. So, Casey, now, one of the things, and I would say one of my favorite things about doing Literary Treks is when we get the covers that have come out. And I love the fact that we've got two brand new covers for books that are coming out here in 2024. It is always exciting when that happens. And so first, we've got two covers. And actually, the first one that got released was Lost to Eternity, which is the movie era book that is coming out there from Greg Cox. And goodness, this cover is absolutely gorgeous. Just gorgeous.
Yeah, it's got some hints of Ex Machina, kind of with the rainbowy colors, but the profiles of the character that we've got on the cover, this is what, we don't really get much for the story for the cover, but if you're judging a book by a cover, this is gorgeous. Like, yeah, it's hard to describe in words, what we're looking at, but it's always great to have movie era anything. And, we get this nice kind of shot of the behind of our beloved. Is this the Refit Enterprise or is this the A? Don't actually know.
I think at this point this is the A, and so I love that. I'm obviously huge fan of the A, and it's my favorite ship. So I'm really excited to see that here. And then I also, I think the other thing that jumps out to me is this feels very reminiscent of what you got in Star Trek V. with the galactic barrier. And so I think there's also that colorization as well. So man, I just, this is a great cover. And the fact that you have Saavik, Spock, and Kirk there as well is phenomenal. So, I mean, this is definitely something that has me very excited. I love the look. I think that it's phenomenal. And so, yeah, I think this one, like you said, it doesn't tell you a lot about the story. But it does, I think it hints at the characters that are going to be important in this story, and as well as just kind of the gorgeousness of the space look to it. Like I just, that's the thing that I'm really gravitating towards, is just how beautifully space is depicted in this. I love it. So I can't wait to read this book. Of course, I love this time period. And I'm really glad that, we're getting it. And so hopefully, it'll be a fantastic book. Greg Cox, always delivers for us. And so really excited, to be able to read this. And then the second cover that we have here, Casey, is, I would say, I'm having a hard time putting into words how like cool this is, because it's a book. It's the next generation, right? But it is also spanning that time period right before Deep Space Nine starts. So it's right between the two, and you've got the Enterprise there at Terok Nor. You've got Garrick on the cover, and this is a great moody, this is kind of what I would expect from this type of cover. So I'm so excited that the artistic choice that they made for this cover. Honestly, I feel bad for everybody listening to this, and I'm so sorry, everyone, that I'm stumbling over my words like an idiot. But really, I don't even know what to say. Like I see this cover, and it just has me so excited.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. There's, Terok Nor, Deep Space Nine, whatever, is a beautiful station, and then seeing the Enterprise D docked at it, whenever it's been on the show, or as artistically displayed here on this cover, is just, I'm kind of right there with you, being a little bit speechless at this, because it's gorgeous, and it's the way it's depicted. It's kind of shadowy. It's very, artistic, but you've got Picard and Garrick, and like you said, it's set before the start of Deep Space Nine. And so really interesting, somewhat unexplored time period for us. And I mean, anytime you got Garrick involved, I'm in, for on Deep Space Nine, that's great. I'm curious to see how much Next Generation there is, or how much crossover there is, or is this really a Garrick story? Because, sometimes they'll put a label on it to sell. They know Star Trek The Next Generation is going to sell maybe more than Deep Space Nine would, at least for some people. Putting Patrick Stewart on the covers is going to help. But, I mean, I don't know. Looking at this cover, it's one of those I want to pick up right now and read and see what this story's about, because it looks good. I don't know what else to say either.
Yeah, I mean, the cool part about this one is that we know from the description that you are going to have great characters in there like Picard. You're going to have characters like Garrick, but we also know that another major character that's going to be playing into this is going to be Ro Laren. And so, which, we talked about last time, the idea how exciting it is to have her here when she was supposed to be the character on Deep Space Nine, and Michelle Forbes decided not to do the show. And so they created Kira. So to have her here, I think is just going to be a huge benefit to the book, and, what we're trying to do in this story. So no, I could not be more excited. And, I think that this is going to be one of those things where, you just kind of imagine the story ending right as, Picard and Sisko meet there and Deep Space Nine on the first episode in Emissary. So I'm very excited about this as an opportunity. And I think, one of the beauties here is that, they have the ability to go back in and fill these stories and these areas where there are questions about, what things were like, and so I can't wait. I think it's going to be, fantastic. So,
Yeah.
Well, Casey, we are going to be covering the comics that are coming out, everyone. We just want you to let you know we'll be hitting those up in the new year. And as we wrap up this year, though, with talking about the Sundered, well, I think it's just time to split and get to the feature.
Let's do it.
Well, Casey, this is a book that on the cover you've got Sulu and you've got Chekhov. And it doesn't really give you a lot to kind of go on of what the story is going to be. And I didn't actually have this out in the outline, but I really, it's something I was just thinking about as a question for you. Because we were just talking about covers, and so this is what was the inspiration for it. But when you see the book having Chekhov and Sulu at the forefront, I would expect this story to feature them very heavily and maybe get into their characters pretty deeply.
Right.
Do you feel like that really happened in this book for both of them?
Probably not for both of them. They're obviously both featured fairly, I wouldn't necessarily say heavily, but they are both main characters in the book. When I remember when this first came out, this was the first time I've actually ever read this, but I remember when it came out thinking, oh, cool, we've got a Captain Sulu story, which effectively we do. Chekhov really is more of an ancillary character in this one. It was kind of an interesting idea to place Chekhov on the Excelsior, which in some ways kind of makes sense. I guess, we don't really know, at least, from what I've read, a lot about Chekhov after the movies, kind of where he went, what he did. It would make sense that his friend Sulu would, kind of recruit him, when the Enterprise was decommissioned. And I feel like we got some, growth or whatever from Chekhov, but not as much as I'd like to see. In fact, actually, we even focus on one of Chekhov's subordinates more than Chekhov himself. And so, which I thought was an interesting choice, but, having Chekhov on the cover was maybe a little bit odd. And I know that Pocket Books has done that in the past, especially way in the past, they would put whoever would sell the books on there. We've even seen some of those on some of the books that we've covered where Spock's right front and center on the cover, and it's really not about Spock at all, or he shows up once. And so it was a little bit more than that with Chekhov here, but, there was definitely a lot of other more main characters maybe than even Sulu in some ways. Like Tuvok maybe was more of a main character in some ways than Sulu.
Yeah, this is something that I just found really interesting. And again, all because we were having the discussion about covers, and it really does feel like a place where, look, I love, having these books in this time period, and I love getting to explore these characters. And this is one of the things, I don't know what happened to Sulu, and I don't know what happened to Chekhov during this time period. After Generations, we don't really have an idea of what happened to these characters. And so I think the opportunity here then is to fill us in on that.
Yeah.
And so I guess, one of the things that I hate to start off maybe in the negative for the book, but I think maybe one of the things that I'm slightly disappointed in the story is that we don't actually get a lot of, I feel like, growth, especially for Chekhov, and not as much as I would have expected from Sulu. We do get to spend time with Sulu, which is great, and I think we get to learn about him as well. Just kind of some of the struggles he has with command decisions that he has to make. And I think it's something that will, we will be talking about that a little bit here as we, move further on into the episode and the story with the book and his struggles and everything. But it just, I think one of the things it felt like it just wasn't as much as I thought it would be. And in some ways that kind of is a little bit frustrating for me because, I think I came into this hoping because of the cover that we were really going to be kind of filling in details about both of these characters' lives in ways that, we haven't had before. And we just don't get that as much as I would have hoped.
Yeah, like I said, it was interesting having Chekhov be Sulu's executive officer, and I would agree. I mean, they were underutilized for being on the cover, and it didn't bother me quite as much. I mean, I would definitely like to know or have more focus on them, I suppose. And we know that Tuvok, from Voyager was on the Excelsior at this time. I mean, even having Sulu and Tuvok maybe on the cover would have been good rather than Chekhov. I mean, Chekhov can be in the story, or even he can be on the cover, but the scenes that we got with Chekhov especially were just not fulfilling, I guess. We didn't get much time with him on the show to begin with. And even really in the movies, Chekhov wasn't really fully utilized. And so this would have been a really great opportunity to explore Chekhov as an executive officer, as a way of him finding command, because he was in command for at least a little while Sulu was off doing his sword fight or whatever. But, there were, I guess, missed opportunities with Chekhov for sure, especially to be so prominently featured on the cover. But, it kind of gets back to the marketing thing of whose face is going to sell the most, and if they're looking at the lost era between, the movies and Star Trek: The Next Generation, then, kind of seems that, Tuvok might not sell as many books as Chekhov would, I guess. Which is kind of an unfortunate how they have to make those decisions sometimes.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think that's definitely, a big part of why, we get what we get. And so, we are going to kind of get into some serious spoilers for the book. This is one of those books where I think it's very difficult to kind of talk about without that. And so, just FYI, everybody, if you haven't read the book, we're going to dive into that. But so, Casey, one of the things that I'm very interested to see where you and how you feel about is the way in which this book really utilizes some interesting aspects of Star Trek lore. One of the things that we get here is these characters called the Neyel, and they are the main kind of antagonists that we have here, along with the Tholians. And so first, I wanted to ask you about this, because this was an interesting choice I found. And the Neyel are actually a collection of people who were on hollowed out asteroids that were working on the Phoenix project alongside of Dr. Cochrane when the kind of nuclear holocaust begins at basically the end of, I would say, World War III in many ways, like the tail end of it. And there is a cosmological accident that throws them across the galaxy. And so they're humans, and so then we have their journey, and that leads them to kind of being what we think of at the beginning of the story as the villains, but, everything turns around. So I just wanted to ask you how you felt about this connection with everything, with them being human, with their connection with Cochrane and the story there. How did that sit with you? Because that's kind of a big, I would say, universe shattering, Star Trek shattering like idea, because, you know, for us, we only knew that Dr. Cochrane was the one who had come up with warp drive and everything. And now to know that there was a whole group of people working on this, how does it work for you?
That was pretty interesting, yeah, because I feel like everything we've known about warp, I mean, Zefram Cochrane is the inventor or the one who discovered whatever warp technology. And yeah, to find that for, I mean 20 or 30 years, like, or, you know, however long it was before, you know, the actual first contact, that they're working on this. And like you said, yeah, they've got essentially colonies on these asteroids that help. They're basically taking the dangerous testing away from Earth. And I don't know. I mean, it kind of makes a little bit more sense that it's a group of people rather than just one guy that discovers it and builds a ship on his own. I mean, we get in Star Trek First Contact, Lily talking about how it took her forever. Like, she's like having to scrounge up titanium by herself, you know, to build the Phoenix, which might have been true as it got closer to the 2060s, you know, after the nuclear holocaust and everything on Earth. But I don't know. It didn't. I kind of liked it because I always do kind of like when they connect certain things back to the lore that we've, you know, come to know in Star Trek. Incidentally, I actually read the Star Trek Titan book, The Red King, a couple of years ago, probably. So I was already introduced to the Neyel from that book. And so when I saw them in this one, I kind of it sounded familiar. So I kind of had to look them up and realize that's where they came from. So this was actually more of an origin story from me for, characters that I already knew were, you know, had this connection to Earth, but, which was actually pretty interesting. The one thing that I guess kind of bugged me a little bit was that the kind of cosmological event or whatever it was that threw this particular asteroid out, 200 light years away, basically into Tholian space, you know, where the rift is, the inner space rift is kind of occurring. But they don't really. It was almost a little confusing at first. I mean, it was clear that the colony disappeared, and then they, you know, when we see their point of view, they're still alive, but just really far away. You know, was that like a warp accident, or was that something else that took them away? But, you know, but for the most part, I mean, I actually really did like those flashback, you know, parts of the book that happen periodically. And we always get date stamps and everything. So it actually made it fairly easy to follow, especially if I paid attention to the dates, the journey basically that these humans take to become the Neyel, and how their language even kind of evolved or almost de-evolved in some ways, since they're really kind of dropping vowels and stuff. But, and I guess kind of the other thing that was a little confusing, and I kind of had to just, suspend some disbelief here, was that in 200 years or however long it's been, they've completely changed their appearance. They've, you know, genetically modified themselves to have like prehensile tails and thumbs on their feet, and like all these, like the tree bark skin, that it seems like, you know, maybe not enough time has passed for them to not even recognize humans when they eventually show up. But, you know, other than those couple things, you know, I actually kind of enjoyed their journey and the connections to Earth and Earth of the past and how they got to where they are. Because it makes sense that they need to have some sort of knowledge of warp technology to conquer the planets that they did, you know, be able to use the technology to their advantage.
Mm-hmm. I'm of two minds. I think it's interesting. I think the whole part where we're trying to kind of fit this in with the time period with Cochrane seemed a little bit forced to me. Mainly because the idea that any time during the Third World War, you've created these like asteroid places where the best and the brightest of people have gone and everything. It's like, I don't really think that that's possible when humanity can't even get along in a World War III situation. That part, I think, is where I found it to be a little bit not realistic, Star Trek, but you know what I'm saying? Like it even for Star Trek, it seemed a little bit forced in that sense. And so that was something where, I will say too, them having the human connection as well. I think I get why we do it thematically for the character of Sulu and where we're trying to go for him, but honestly, that doesn't really work for me. Either, and we'll talk in more detail as to why that doesn't work when we actually talk about Sulu's conundrum. But, that also feels kind of forced, I think, to me. And then, in 200 years, the way that they have genetically altered themselves to the point where now they have, 2 thumbs on their hands and they have a tail and all of these type of things. I just felt like, okay, we're really out there with all of this. And I don't know. And I think the biggest thing was this. The Tholians are fascinating. And I feel like, sadly, the Tholians start to take a back seat in the book where they should be the prime storytelling, focus, because they're a really interesting race. We don't know a ton about them, and I would have been much more excited to actually have spent more time with them. I honestly forgot in the Red King that the Neyel were there, but that I haven't read that book since it came out, and so yeah. I mean, to me, that's where I kind of came down with that. It's not uninteresting, but it just felt like it was kind of taking away from the things that I actually was really caring about in this story. And I think that's the thing that bothered me, is that I every time that they were on, I found myself being like, can we just kind of get back to, the story that I do kind of care about, which is the Tholian story. Yeah. To me, that was the story that I kind of was really invested in, and I was kind of sad that, they kind of neglected, if you ask me.
Yeah. I definitely, see where you're coming from on there. It's funny though, because I think my favorite parts were definitely the stuff with the Neyel and seeing them, and I almost wanted more because there were some leaps and bounds taken with them, and some, like I said, some suspension of disbelief that we have to take that they could, yes, they're genetically engineering themselves, but then that's just immediately affecting the evolution of their species to where, I mean, unless they're doing some gene modifications on them as they're born, I don't see, if you add a tail to somebody, that their kid is not going to come out with a tail, so. But yeah, I agree too with the Tholians. I mean, they're definitely a threat that, obviously we get a lot in the Vanguard novels, which ironically the asteroid in this one is called Vanguard. But they do seem kind of like a side villain, I guess, somebody to come in and, I don't know, have a common foe, with the, Starfleet and the Neyel having kind of this common foe. But even then, at this point, Sulu is there with an ambassador to try to kind of broker peace with the Tholians and come to some common ground, and which I think would have been a really interesting way to learn more about the Tholians if we'd had more time with the ambassador, working with the Tholian ambassador to find common ground, to start understanding each other more. Maybe the Tholians aren't such bad people after all. We don't really know. And like you said, we don't really get a lot of them in this book. We start to we start to learn more about like their caste system and everything, and some of their like rituals, kind of like the truth battle or whatever that one was called, the sword fight that Sulu has with their admiral. But it especially because the Tholians are so different in their high pressure suits and their high pressure environment. It's super hot, and the Starfleet people trying to find ways to be able to even be in the same room with the Tholians to be able to talk with them. It's just not something that we've ever been even really able to explore much on the shows, except for, we get some mirror universe action in Star Trek Enterprise with one of the Tholians, but otherwise, we get a brief glimpse of them in the original series, and that's about it. And so, we always get the Klingons and the Romulans and the Borg and whoever, but, the Tholians are one of those ones that we just don't hear enough about. And so I think it was smart for them to use them here, but I'd agree that we could have used some more, though.
I think talking about the Tholians, I think it's a great place to just kind of be able to start to dive into, them as the characters here in the story, and, really seeing that. And I think that they're, again, they're the part of the story that I'm really interested in here. I think that they're the part of the story that they, like you mentioned, we just don't get a ton of chances in any Star Trek, and it makes sense, because there's just, they were a hard species to even create in the first place for Enterprise, right? Like this is a difficult thing to make happen. And I wish that this book then had kind of taken more of that and ran with it, because you can't do this as well in a show, I don't think, unless you're on the budgets that we have now for the new series that we're doing. I mean, I think you could absolutely make this happen at this point, but it's more difficult. But I think the thing is that there seemed to be a lot of competing elements in the book. And the place where, I was most interested, where we're learning about the Tholians, their caste system, their way of life, just the fact that, yes, they are these xenophobic aliens to us. They have a whole society that is, I think fascinating to learn about. And to me, that's the place where I was really interested, because in some ways, I think, because I forgot that the Neyel were in the Red King, and they're not a thing that we've ever really seen in the series, I'm invested really in the Tholian story, and I just wish we had got more of it.
And that's, what we always want from our tie-in fiction, and we've talked about it a lot on this show, is, the tie-in fiction does it best when they're expanding on stuff that we are already somewhat familiar with, or maybe we've gotten a taste, a breadcrumb, or just something. It's great when authors can come in and create their own species, their own characters and everything, but to really tie that into what matters to us. And I know that the Neyel are supposed to be kind of the Romulans, to the Vulcans, the Neyel to the humans kind of thing. But yeah, the Tholians are, they're just so unutilized. They could be such a scary race, and if they're going to use them at all, use them a lot instead of just teasing us with more.
Well, and I think what's interesting is that one of the things they did with the Tholians, that they were doing with the Tholians in this book, that they kind of did say with the Zenkethi, right, in the novels, they made this an incredibly fascinating race. And that's the place where I felt like if the Neyel hadn't been the race that the Tholians were having this battle with, and it was maybe something where it's kind of more generic alien of the week kind of thing, and you don't need to focus so much of the story on them, then we could really, I think, utilize that page count to really dive in with Tholian stuff and get even more detail in them and make them really fully rounded characters. Because I also liked the idea that, you know, you had some Tholians that were more amenable to working with Starfleet and creating peace than others. And I think all of that's incredibly interesting. And so I think that there just became competing storylines. And, you know, you like the Neyel one more, I like the Tholian one more, but it almost felt like that both of them really needed just their own book, so they could get their fully fledged story. Because that was the other thing I felt like with the Neyel as well, is that every time we were talking about them, it felt like we have to do this very quickly, you know, whereas that whole story, I feel like, is you need and you kind of want a lot more detail, especially when it comes into them, you know, utilizing the genetic engineering to create who they're going to be as we know them later on in the book. So,
yeah, and I mean, and I would agree. I think having this as 2 books would have been good, because we did try to fit too much in. Having the Neyel as kind of an offshoot of the human race, you know, was an interesting idea. But you know, one thing that I was just thinking of too was with the Tholians. You know, we were kind of just talking about how we hardly ever saw them on the show, and I mean, I feel like we don't even really get much of them in our Next Generation or Deep Space Nine stories. I think they were one of the members of the Typhon Pact, but otherwise, like, they're not really. I don't know, like, because they were so underutilized, I almost wonder if the authors here were kind of trying to say, like, here's why we don't really hear much from the Tholians anymore, because we've kind of come to an understanding with them because of these events that happened, and so they're not like friends, but they're also not our.
They're like
not
frenemies,
completely adversaries. Maybe kind of a Cold War. Yeah. And so but even there, I don't really necessarily feel like that was even solidified enough to really, you know, justify all the things that happened. And I mean, you know, and ultimately when it comes down to it, both of these, like, this whole conflict itself was really, I think, the intention, you know, to have something for Sulu to have to focus on, to for us to see him and how he is as a captain and as a diplomat, and, you know, kind of, I guess, you know, where he falls in that spectrum of, you know, a Kirk or a Picard or a Cisco or whatever, like, what kind of captain is Sulu? And I mean, that's really because he's kind of bouncing back and forth between these stories. And, you know, although the focus gets lost sometimes, I think that was the intention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could not agree with you more. We talked a little bit there at the beginning about the storylines for Sulu and the storylines for Chekhov, but Sulu's big storyline here becomes Sulu apparently being a character who likes to take on responsibility for everything, and finds himself feeling responsible for the Neyel and their war with the Tholians because their distant relationship to humanity. And I really wanted to ask you about that idea, because it's one of the core storylines for our cover character in Sulu.
Yeah, this is one thing that probably didn't work for me as well. Like, it felt like it kind of came out of left field when he was really getting kind of down on himself and taking responsibility and, you know, willing to die as a representative of humanity, you know, on behalf of the Neyel. And I wouldn't necessarily say it's out of character, but I don't even say I'd say it's in character for him. I mean, if we're trying to create a character trait for Sulu, that's fine, but I don't think that, for me, I don't really feel like I've ever seen anything that would make me believe that Sulu would feel this way. I mean, you know, Kirk Kirk takes responsibility in certain ways by kind of just forcing people to do what he wants. Picard, though, never would, well, I was going to say never would take responsibility for humanity, but that was kind of the whole thing with Q, I guess. But we've not seen something like that from Sulu, I don't think. So it was just kind of weird. I mean, I think it was a way to, humanize, I guess, Sulu somewhat, but I don't know. I feel like any other character, even Chekhov maybe would have been a better character to feel that responsibility more than Sulu.
Yeah, I think I absolutely really struggled with this idea that Sulu would feel himself responsible for the Neyel because they have a connection with humanity. And it felt like a place where we're discussing the ideas of where are people responsible for past actions, right? And their connection to those people and those past actions. And I think the problem is that, to me, it's not, I wouldn't say it's really well done, because I'm sitting there thinking to myself, why in the world does he feel responsible for these people? It has nothing to do with what happened to them or what they're doing now. He legit has no connection to them. Yes, they might, have human ancestry, but that was hundreds of years before Sulu was born. And so that was a thing that really kind of I was just it felt, there's a few things in this book that just felt very forced, and this was one of the things that felt very forced, where we've got this idea, and at the end of the book, Sulu kind of learns to not take responsibility for things he didn't do, with how he's going to tell the story to Starfleet about what happened and what he's going to take responsibility for and what he's not going to take responsibility for. And so, yeah, I think it just doesn't work for me. And it's frustrating because it's the big storyline for the character here. And, I want to be invested in what's happening with Sulu in the story, but I'm just not invested with his struggle because I'm like, dude, why are you struggling with this? I just don't personally get it. And maybe other people love it and get it and all that, but to me, I wasn't getting it.
Yeah. And I feel like too, I almost feel like a better story for Sulu would be, almost if the ambassador had died and he had to step in as ambassador or, in some diplomatic capacity. I always find it funny when in the books, Sulu always loves talking about how he was there at Khitomer and he helped save Kirk and everything, when in reality he showed up at the very end and pointed a phaser at somebody. But yeah,
you're 100% right. What happens? They get there to help destroy the bird of prey. But that's after, Uhura has already figured out how to find it. And so, yeah, 100%.
Yeah. They take some pot shots,
yeah.
But that's about it.
Good job, bud. Good job.
And yeah, exactly. But even more, especially the way this book started, where I was hoping it was going to go with Sulu too, was, there was kind of this Mission Impossible type of mission that Sulu was given, hey, go spy on the Tholians, see what's going on, send some probes out and everything. But if you get caught, we're going to disavow all knowledge of you. And I think this could have been a really interesting spy story. And heck, I wouldn't even minded so much if Section 31 had shown up. That would have almost made more sense than him kind of being this kind of highly emotional, I'm taking everybody's problems onto my shoulders and going to bear that for everybody. That's not Sulu. He's more of a warrior or whatever, which we saw in this book, which was great. But, just this whole, yeah, I don't know. Like the fact that the Admiral had to talk him down was kind of like the Admiral Nagura had to talk him down from taking so much responsibility was kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. It's a part of the book here for sure. It's not a huge part, but I did think it was interesting because, Star Trek is so much about this idea of communication and really having this failure to communicate between the Neyel and the Tholians, and really, what they say about assuming, and they both just assume because they can't communicate with one another, and it doesn't seem like they try all that hard, that they question the sentience of the other race, and it allows them to basically, feel okay, or most of the people to feel okay about going to war with the other and trying to eradicate them because they're just vermin. And of course, the theme of communication becoming very important then, and the fact that it's not until the ability to communicate that they can possibly avoid war, to kind of understand the things that are happening. And so I liked that was in the book. And again, I think in some ways, I almost would have liked it if this failure to communicate had been between the Federation and the Tholians, where by getting to understand the Tholians, their culture, their caste system, and all those things, and then learning how to talk to them in the same way you would have I think in Enterprise when you have Archer having to deal with the Andorians or the Tellarites, right? And he has to kind of take a different perspective and a mindset that he can talk to them differently than he might a Vulcan or a human even, right? And so I think that might have been something I would have been much more interested in seeing because, I think it would have played out even better. And again, I think it's a great theme. It's very Star Trek. It just kind of lacks in its ability to really truly connect, I think, with the reader because, it's there, but you don't get the focus that you would hope for a theme like that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it really would have been interesting if even like the first half of the book focused on the Federation and the Tholians trying to come to terms, learning to communicate, almost like finding a common ground. Well, in the meantime, in the background, there's these like attacks happening and finding that the Neyel, who are arguably genocidal against, they're attacking any Tholians they can possibly find. And granted, they've had a bad go of things. I mean, I think they, the Nausicaans were the first ones that they really ever encountered, which was another aggressive species, but almost have the Tholians and the Federation kind of on the same side, kind of battling against the Neyel before they discover this kind of connection to humanity. And now we can have this play where as the Federation's trying to understand the Neyel more, and learn about this connection. The Tholians maybe are, again, seeing things from a different side and saying, yeah, but they're attacking us, they're killing our innocents and whatever. And like, are you going to stand with us? Are you going to stand with them? Which, again, is kind of another theme. There's this us or them mentality with the, on both sides, the Neyel and the Tholians. And, there would have been, there's some interesting ways I think this could have gone for sure in that way and really focused on, especially because you got an ambassador there focusing on their ability to communicate or to work on communication with alien species.
Yeah. What did you think of, one of the things that we do, of course, get in the book, is the different connections we have to different parts of Star Trek, whether it's TOS with, the Defiant being lost in the interphase section of space, the Ares 4 from One Small Step, getting more on Tuvok and the reason he does leave Starfleet for a while to pursue Kolinar. And there's others in there as well. How did you feel like all of those worked for you, and that, were well done at that point?
Not totally. With the Defiant, there's lots of good callbacks. I mean, they call out the Defiant a couple times, you know, because they're obviously familiar with the interphase in Tholian territory and everything. But you know, it was a little much when they were going through that space to get to the Neyel homeworld, and they kind of have to pass it, and they're like, "Oh, we'll leave that for someone else," which we know that someone else is going to be, you know, the Mirror Enterprise, like Star Trek Enterprise crew, but. You know, and the Ares 4, you know, was one, I think that one was okay because it was a little bit more, kind of mentioned and, kind of tied into, you know, Cochrane's work or the Project Phoenix, I guess, which was good. Tuvok, I know we're in a different point in his life. I was not a Tuvok fan in this book. If this was my first introduction to Tuvok, I'd probably never really want to see him again because he was kind of annoying. And, you know, obviously he's leaving. This is his kind of first go in Starfleet, which we know from Voyager. And then he takes a break to pursue Kulinar. He comes back, he teaches for a while, and then he joins up in Starfleet again. And I just didn't care for this Tuvok. He's insubordinate. He's, I don't know. He was just annoying every time he was there and kind of talking. I kind of just felt like he was getting in the way. And, you know, we got to have him. Well, we don't have to, but it makes sense to have him there since we know he served under Sulu on the Excelsior. But I almost wish we'd have done something a little bit differently for him. But I mean, this kind of does bring to light why he wanted to leave Starfleet. I mean, he didn't feel like he fit in. And I agree. I don't think he fit in really well here. So, I mean, maybe in that way it did actually work for me, but I don't know. I think, you know, for the most part, I always do like it when there's like little connections and Easter eggs. And I mean, I would say nobody does it really better than Christopher L. Bennett, but, you know, the authors here, you know, obviously playing in the time period they're in and with the subject matter they're in, they definitely grabbed a lot of decent Easter eggs to throw in there. And like I said, I think some of them were maybe used too much rather than just kind of having some mentions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think the Ares 4 one worked, actually. That one absolutely made sense with what you did with the Neyel and where they came from. So I thought that was fine. I think, like you said, the Defiant one was just absolutely unnecessary because it's better just that we're here in this section of space. We know the Defiant was at that place in space and then it's going to get lost and go to the Mirror Universe. So I like that much better. I think, you know, like what you said with Tuvok, he was a frustrating character in that sense. It was not as enjoyable to read him. And I'm obviously that's part of the storyline for him, right? Where we're seeing him in his development. He's very different. And so I think with you, I feel like it just seemed as though it might have just been one of those places where, you know, then we have a car here as well. And, you know, other characters, and there was so much storyline happening here. And then we had places where we were legitimately just like quoting sections of other stories, and I was like, okay,
the shows.
I really feel as though this book needed a total edit, and it needed the editor to come in and be like, okay, we need to focus on this, and this, and you need to like streamline or cut out these parts. And so I think that's the thing where some of the connections worked for me and some of them didn't, and part of it just felt like that the book feels too choppy because you're jumping between all these time periods trying to tell all these stories. And I personally just found myself kind of losing interest in places where it's like, I'm not enjoying this part of the story as much, but I just want to get back to the other part of the story. And that's the other thing when you're doing a book like this, where you have cut it up into sections, you need each section to hold the reader's interest. And I didn't find every section or every storyline really holding my interest, unfortunately. And that's, I think, the place where the connections part, where, yeah, some of them work and then some of them just, you know, I don't care. Or I just like it. That is not necessary. So that's kind of where I ended up coming down with that.
Yeah, I think, I mostly didn't mind some of the choppiness, just because I knew that, given how many different sections there were in this book and the way that they kind of took us through the story, or the stories, that mostly worked for me. What was hard was when there were several points where we would end a chapter on quite a cliffhanger, and then it'd be like quite a few more chapters before we got back to that story, because, we're on the Excelsior, and then we go and we were with the Neyel in the past for a while, and then we're with the Tholians, and now we're finally back to the Excelsior, and it kind of picks up where it left off, and I completely had forgotten by that point, whatever was happening before that, and kind of had to flip back and find out, wait, where did we last end? And so, if you're going to end on cliffhangers like that, don't leave so much space, because, especially for this one, I took my time reading this one. And so it could be like a day or two later before I'm, picking it back up again and getting into the next, coming back to a storyline that we were left on a cliffhanger before. So, and then, they weren't even loosely connected at that point. We were like getting pretty disparate stories, like just very different from each other, kind of coming together towards the end, which can be good in some books, and in others, sometimes you're just kind of wondering what you're reading, because, am I reading 3 books or 1 book?
Yeah. No, I 100% agree with you. So I'm really interested to see where you come down on your ratings for the Sundered then.
Well, after this discussion, I've actually lowered my rating a little bit. I honestly, when I finished this book, I really enjoyed this one. When I finished it earlier today, I gave it a 5 on Goodreads, but like just now, I reduced it to a 4. It's a really interesting read. There are arguably quite a few problems with this book. But it's, an interesting time period that we're in, some interesting concepts, however they were handled, or, maybe we didn't get enough of some stories, or we got too much of others, or, the suspension of just disbelief was just too much. But, overall, I enjoyed it. And, I give it a pretty solid, 4 interspatial rifts. And where'd you come in on this one?
Yeah, for me, I am much lower on this book. This comes out to be, on Goodreads, it would be a 3, but in all actuality, I would give it a 2.5 out of 5, honestly. There's a whole portion of this story I just was not that invested in, and partially I think it's because that storyline needed its own book. And it just felt like the book was trying to do too many things with too many characters, and there wasn't enough focus. And so, yeah, I was frustrated in that, and it didn't work as well for me as I wanted it to. And it's frustrating too for me, because this is a time period which I am incredibly interested in. After Star Trek Generations and the Next Generation, I think it's a time period that is just rife with good storytelling opportunities. And so I do hope that as we move forward in the Lost Era series that things will continue to get even more interesting. But, yeah, can't win them all.
I wish we had, I know we got a lot of Lost Era books, but I wish we had more like that. We've had some that just, even with the new Next Generation book, Pliable Truths, it's not so Lost Era Next Generation wise, but it kind of is in the Deep Space Nine universe. I think I know a bunch of these Lost Era ones were covered in years past on Literary Treks, and I haven't read them all, so I might have to go back and revisit those and find those episodes and listen to them again.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Casey. I mean, again, honestly, I always thought that this should have been the era that they should have put a show in. I don't know why they didn't. Forget trying to do Discovery and Strange New Worlds. Put a show here, and you got plenty of reasons to, because you got so much you can do. And so I just would have loved that. But Casey, I'm excited for coming back there in the new year. We've got some exciting things for everybody coming up as well, so you'll want to be on the lookout for that. But if people wanted to catch up with you here and see what else is happening with you these days, where would they find you?
Well, you can always find me on Goodreads, Letterboxd, Instagram and X at Knitting Trekkie. And again, I'm always poking around on Facebook and the Babel Conference. I love to lurk around, see people's comments, and give us a shout out. And I'd love to talk to you guys.
Absolutely. Well, you can find me all over the place on social media under the name MattRushing02. Here on the network, of course, you can find me in the 602 Club, talking about all of the franchises we love, and then, of course, doing The Orb, Warp 5, The Artificial Tango, and Saddle Up. And then over on the Nerd Party Network, I've got a completed show I did with Drea Kaufman, talking about every single chapter of Harry Potter, called Owl Post, and you'll find me doing Aggressive Negotiations with John Mills, as we're talking about Star Wars each and every week. But thank you so much for joining us, and until next time, live long
and read on.
What do you call that, light reading? To each his own, number one.